Thanks very much for joining us today for this first in a series of interviews that we're doing here at IESE with people around the world who are thinking innovatively about education and learning, whether it's in the classroom, in the corporate place, in the workplace, or in the digital sphere. And I think it's quite fitting to kick us off today by talking with Josh Bersin, the founder of Bersin by Deloitte and the Global Authority on Strategic and Resource Management and Corporate Learning. Hi, Josh. Thanks for being with us.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So what we'll do for those of you who are connected, you have the chance to ask questions. So you'll see that there's a button underneath your video screen where you can ask questions. And if we have time, we'll try to answer a couple of questions towards the end. But Josh, let's talk about corporate learning. I think it's very fascinating to talk about this topic because a lot has changed. And I think a lot of the changes are due to technology. And so that has implications for how companies can learn more intelligently, how they can redesign learning. But how exactly has technology changed learning and development in the workplace?
Well, it's a funny thing. It's almost as if everything's changed and learning is catching up, is really what's happened. If you look at a lot of, I'm sure the students are younger than me, but if you look at the early days of the internet in the early 2000s, when we first started to apply technology to learning over the web, we took classroom programs like what we're doing today, and we tried to mimic them online, and that was called e-learning. And e-learning programs at the time were relatively slow and stepwise, one step, page. There was a little bit of video, mostly animation. We used technology called Flash, which is now almost obsolete, and it cost $75,000 or $100,000 to $100,000 an hour to build the content. So it was very, it was very rarely used for small topics. It was used for big topics. Since then, in the last 15 years, we've had YouTube, we've had Google, we've had Twitter, Facebook, instant video, tools like Snapchat, mobile phones. We can capture content instantly. And at the same time, we've, essentially transformed the way we capture instructional content. We've also transformed the way we work. Most of us who are in big businesses, or even if you're in a small company, you're online all the time. You're working nights and weekends, whether you like it or not. You're looking at your phone. And when you want to learn something, you want to learn it now. You don't have time to spend 2 or 3 hours going through a course, clicking around, finding something. And all of the technology in corporations was designed around that decade-old model. So learning management technologies, the tools that companies use to build content are all old. So this idea of digital learning, which to me implies learning as you need it, when you need it, is really, it hit us by surprise. In fact, I know it's hit it by surprise. Just today, we launched a body of research we've been doing for about a year called the High Impact Learning Organization. And we found that the Net Promoter Score, which is the whether somebody would recommend your product or service to a friend, the Net Promoter Score of learning and development in business is negative, which means that of the 700 or 800 companies we surveyed, most business people are saying, I wouldn't recommend my training department to anybody else. Now, even with all that technology change, and we can talk more about what that implies, the core way people learn still is through experiences. I wrote a book on learning a long time ago and had to think about this a lot over the years. And if you really think about everything you know how to do as a professional, as a student, as somebody who in sports and music, you didn't learn it by going to a class. You learned it by doing it. You learned it by doing it and failing and getting help and getting coaching and getting advice and figuring it out step by step. And so that iterative, what is now called space learning or continuous process of learning is still part of the corporate landscape. So companies that are good at this are still doing a lot of classroom training, a lot of in-person training. And as businesses become more interconnected, and this is another topic for another course, but organizations are being redefined and reorganized around teams and networks. We need to get people together face to face. And so the corporate university, which was actually expected to die. And there were articles written when I started this talking about how we were going to do away with corporate universities and it was all going to be online, are back. Deloitte has built a bunch of them. We're talking to a lot of clients that are building them. And the reason they're building them is people have to spend time face-to-face together to meet each other, to get to know each other, to build personal relationships. And then all the electronic stuff works great. But it doesn't work great until you've really had a chance to get to know people. So all those things have happened in a really short period of time. I mean, I think if I think back about the e-learning research that we did in the beginning, it was only 15 years ago, which you know, it's a long time for some people, but it's really not that long. And the technology industry is just catching up. So maybe, you know, we can talk more about what's next, but that's my assessment. Oh, one more thing. Let me just mention one more thing. The other thing, of course, that's changed is the demand. We as professionals now know that everything we do is becoming obsolete every month, every quarter, every year. Whether you're a salesperson, a software engineer, a marketing person, a finance person, a business manager, whatever it is, if you're not keeping up on your trade and your profession, you are probably falling behind. And so the demand for learning is even more intense inside of companies, because people can go into the consumer internet and find things in YouTube or lynda.com or wherever. Then they go into the corporate training department and they can't find anything. So that's, of course, created more pressure than ever. I don't know, there's a lot.
Yeah, that obviously begs the question, I mean, how do you structure this learning? You've talked about there being more content, there's more demand for content, but there's also demand for small pieces, right? Things you need right now to help me solve a task or new skills. And so I guess juggling the two, and how do you structure that in building this into your learning development strategy in the company will have changed?
Well, there's dozens of ways to organize it, but I think the simplest way to think about it is you have what I call micro and macro learning. Micro learning is small bits of information that might be a blog, an article, a video, a podcast that you can learn from in a few minutes. You're not going to learn a whole discipline in a few minutes, but you can learn something that you remember and something that you need. And the interesting innovations that are happening in microlearning is that research has been done that shows that the human brain does not retain large amounts of information when it's consumed at once. It's sort of like our stomachs. You know, you can't eat too much at a time. You can't absorb too much at a time in your brain. But you do absorb and remember things if you get them periodically on a regular basis with space in between, and people ask you questions about what you learned. So if you watched a 1-minute video, like for example, at the end of this webinar, if you never heard from me again, you'd probably forget 90% of it. But if you went back online and we had another session in 2 days and we asked you a couple questions about what happened this morning and would force you to jog your memory and remember what happened, that actually works. So this idea of micro-learning doesn't mean just creating a bunch of little videos and throwing them out there. It also means arranging them and creating an adaptive learning platform that allows you to get what you need on a regular basis. In the other form of the macro, that's really kind of stuff we've done for years. It's classes, it's multi-day programs, it's exercises, it's case studies, peer groups. My son happens to be in a class right now at SAP going through sales training. It's a 3-week class. They're actually in a hotel. They're going to be meeting together. They're going to be doing projects. That's not gone away, and I don't want to encourage anybody to think that it has. That's still there too. But we have to do both. and I think what's new is this whole idea of curated spaced micro-learning has not been something we've done that much yet. In fact, a study just came out, I read last couple days. The e-learning guild did some research on that and found that about 10 to 11% of learning professionals have now done enough micro-learning that they think they know how to do it. So it's growing in popularity, but the tools are new, and there's no standard platforms yet for doing this. And that's, I think, one of the most frustrating part of this is that most of the technology we have in companies hasn't kept up.
You've talked about there being demand by employees and professionals to engage in learning, but when you decentralize learning, the question is, how do you track whether people actually do it. We would hope they're intrinsically generally motivated to do so, but how do we know, right? Especially if you design a structure, if you build.
Yeah, the issue of decentralizing, so let me talk about that for a minute, because we've studied this a lot. So you have there's basically three ways to set this all up. Number one is you centralize it completely. So you have a corporate university, you build the content centrally, you develop it centrally, and you try to serve the needs of the whole company. That works when you're a small company, and it doesn't work as you grow. And eventually what happens is the sales department, the manufacturing plant, the finance department says, we're not waiting for corporate training to do this. We're going to do it on our own. They hire their own trainers, they build their own content, they do their own thing. And then you reach a stage of what we call anarchy, where there's training going on all over the place. An enormous amount of money is wasted, and no one even knows how much is being spent because it's not even spent on the same charge code. And we do studies and projects with companies on this, and we find that they are often spending 4 to 10 times more on learning than they think they are. So the third model is what we call federated, where you make a formal, a very well thought out decision about what's going to be centralized and what isn't, and you centralize some technology and you decentralize other things. And you can track almost everything that people do if you choose to. In the early days of the training industry, we had this technology standard called SCORM that was a technology, an API that would allow you to track digital content in a course. But what if you're just clicking on a video or reading an article? Well, you can now track that too. So there's at least a dozen vendors that sell tools now that will track everything. So if you choose to track it all, and you don't have to, you could actually create a transcript of everything that every employee did online and, analyze that. I'm not sure how useful it'll be, but, eventually we'll have tools that will help. So, but if you don't have a federated structure and a learning and development department that is run by somebody who's able to closely align with the rest of the business, you're going to end up having a bunch of different training groups doing their own thing. I'm not saying they won't do it well. They might do it very well. In fact, they might do it better, but you won't be able to track it and make, in common sense of it. And there will be duplicative tools. There'll be duplicate technology. There'll be wasted money. There'll be people reinventing things. And that's what most big companies are like. I mean, I have yet to find very few companies manage this well because it is such a complicated area.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously it's not only about differentiating between micro and macro, but also as professionals we have to learn lifelong, and our careers are more fragmented.
Right.
So we have different needs at different times in our careers. So that means, I guess you would have to design different classes of learning content, whether it's micro and macro, for different needs. That makes it quite complex. How do you do that in corporate?
Well, I've been writing about this. I use the term digital learning to connote not the format of learning, but the way of learning. Digital is a way of learning. Mm-hmm. In the digital world, we get what we want when we want it. We've become very impatient. I want a car, I press Uber and it shows up. I want food, I go online, I order it, it shows up. I want to order something, I go online, I order it, it's here tomorrow. That behavior that we find in the consumer world has created expectations in our brains to have the same behavior in the world of learning. So if you're a 62-year-old person, I'm 61. If you're a 60-year-old person and you want to learn something new, like the other day I wanted to learn something technical, I don't remember what it was. I just went online, I found a course and I browsed through it, and in about 10 minutes I found exactly what I wanted. If that's not easy to do in your company, you're going to find people frustrated and they won't do it. They just won't learn, or they will learn somewhere else, or they will leave. A lot of research has been done over the last year or so, and I've looked at a lot of it, that says that in people, certainly people below the age of 35 and a lot of people in other ages, your ability to learn on the job is one of, if not the largest maker of employment brand, of loyalty, of engagement. If you're in a job where you're not learning and you're not growing, you're probably falling behind, financially. So this is a business problem, not just an HR problem. Obviously training is part, the reason we do training is usually for productivity and safety and compliance, but there's also an issue of employment brand. And that's why we have this sort of scurrying going on in the corporate space of trying to figure out how to replace old systems and build something new. And the problem is the new world is not as clear as it needs to be yet. So there's a lot of handcrafting going on.
Mm-hmm. If we take the perspective of the learner, him or herself, are there particular capabilities that you need to develop to, well, take the most out of what's on offer in this new learning landscape?
Yeah, I think the idea of learning agility and passion to learn has been around a long time. It's been around as long as I've been doing this, but it's probably more important than ever now. They're actually apparently teaching kids how to learn early in school, because I think young people today, who grew up with the internet are a little bit, maybe naive on what a given website may say and whether it's true. But I think there's a skill set. Well, here's the thing. I think most human beings, and this is certainly my opinion, but I think there's research. Most human beings actually crave learning. It's part of our human desire to grow and develop as just who we are. So we seek things out that are interesting to us, both entertaining and interesting, because they help us grow in the direction we personally want to go, whatever it may be. I want to be a manager, I want to be an engineer, I want to learn more about yoga, whatever. We seek those things out, and actually some of the best advertising and marketing is actually educational. The problem is teaching people how to do it and making time for it and giving them the context for it at work. If your boss is giving you so much to do that you're working all weekend and all night, and he or she's on your back constantly bugging you about this project or that project, and he or she never asks you, what did you learn? Let's take a few minutes and reflect. Let's look at why that failed. He's not making it very easy for you to learn anything, or she. And so culture plays a big role in people's ability to learn at work. We have to slow down just a little bit. We have to take time at the end of projects, during meetings, during one-on-ones, to ask ourselves questions, to ask other people's questions, and to listen. That is where learning happens. Doesn't just happen by watching a video. So we did research 2 times, maybe we're doing this again. We've actually done it a bunch of times on learning culture, and we found that companies that have a strong learning culture have a very strong culture of listening to bad news, talking about mistakes, having after-action reviews, giving people time to develop themselves, clearly defined time. I mean, like hours, and giving people time for reflection, and valuing learning at the corporate level, at the CEO level, so that it isn't something you kind of squeeze in at the edge when you have a little bit of time and nobody's bugging you. And those are things that are, some companies do and some companies don't. The worse, financial situation you're in, the less likely you're going to do that, but the more you may need it. I mean, most companies that cut learning, cut training, they fire the training department, they get rid of the head of learning. This happens all the time. It's always the first thing that gets cut when the financials are bad. And then all of a sudden the company gets rid of a bunch of people and says, well, okay, let's transform into this new business area. Everybody looks around and says, I don't know how to do that. So I don't think it's worth, so this is, my experience is that cutting learning is always something that hurts later. So the culture is a big part of it. I think we as people generally are pretty good at absorbing it, but if the culture isn't there, it's very, very hard.
There's a question here in the audience from a recent alumni, a graduate of our executive MBA, Joaquim, who's asking what type of tools could be used or are likely to be used in the future. Is it experiential simulations? Is it content snippets? What type of tools would you envision?
Well, I would say, in terms of the content itself, video is very, very big and very inexpensive now. Capturing video, editing video, annotating video. There's now tools that can add assessments to video. So that has replaced Flash and more traditional HTML development, which was very expensive. I do believe virtual reality will become big. It is big in a few areas. Like I talked to a company that that builds elevator systems, for example, and they have very, very complicated mechanical technician repair training, and they actually built a model of an elevator in virtual reality. You can go in there and you can play with it, and while you're on the job, you can actually fire up this virtual reality thing, and your manager back in another city can see it and train you. So that's coming. Simulations are still an enormously powerful tool for business and human management skills. So the content, world hasn't changed that much, except that the video has replaced Flash. But I think what's really changed the most is the experience around it. Learning management systems, which are called LMSs, are about 20 years old, 25 years old. They were designed around catalogs of courses. They were basically designed around a university model. They are very old-fashioned and very hard to use. And there's a new generation of platforms. I like to call them learning experience platforms. Nobody's come up with a better name yet. I'm waiting to hear it. But that are almost like mobile curation tools. So you can take a bunch of content and point to it, and you can also let employees upload and point to their own content. So an employee can find something that they think is important and recommend it to other people. So those are very powerful tools that are becoming very big in the market. The three major vendors of them are Edcast, Degreed, and PathGather. Those are the three bigger ones, but there's other ones too. And I think there'll be more. There's also adaptive learning platforms. There's platforms that allow you to share your learning experience with others, that allow you to practice online. And for example, one of the most powerful tools in sales training is a very simple tool that allows you to videotape your sample sales call and send it to your peers. So you do a sales call, you give somebody an exercise and say, do a 2-minute sales call on such and such a product. You turn on your video on your camera, you record it, you press done, you send it to your peers give you feedback. That's an extremely powerful way to learn. You learn from the others, you get to help other people learn, and it costs almost nothing. We couldn't do that 10 years ago. So tools like that are becoming very popular.
Mm-hmm. There's one other question from the audience which relates a bit to what you just mentioned. How do you embed learning in day-to-day activities? Right? So you talked about the importance of time, right? Making time for it, linking into activities. So as learning, I guess that could occur as you're facing problems. What are other ways to embed it further?
Well, there's technologies like the one I mentioned earlier, space learning technology that gives you things to learn every day. And so for compliance training, safety training, very rigorous manufacturing training, there's products that will, space learning products that I mentioned in that article that I wrote, that will actually give you exactly what you need when you need it. But I do think the bigger opportunity to bring learning into work is managers, how managers spend their time and what managers ask people to do. And for those of you that are managers or have been managers or hope to be managers, how much time during the week do you get together with either your team or individuals and talk about what's broken and what we could be doing better? Probably not very much. Those are learning experiences. How much time do you spend coaching individuals on your team and answering questions for them and helping them find what they need and connect them to people in the organizations they need to know? In most bigger companies, even in small companies, almost everything you need to know is in the mind of someone else. But you don't know who they are, and they're busy, and maybe they don't want to talk to you because they've got their own thing to do. Unlocking that human network is a huge opportunity to learn. I had an interesting conversation with a very famous educator named Edward Schein, who's one of the most famous authors of corporate culture. And I asked him last year, of all the things you've learned about corporate culture, what's the number one thing that's had the biggest impact on organizational performance? And he said, it's very simple. people being willing to help other people, which, sounds simple, but it's hard when you're busy. And that is a learning activity that comes from internally. So I think the learning in the flow of work, a lot of that is done by humans. And by the way, there also are incredible technologies for what is used to be called performance support, but for inline learning. WalkMe is the name of one of them. SAP has tools like this that actually allow you to author content that is context sensitive, that will deliver learning about what it is you're trying to do. And I think that's going to be bigger and bigger and bigger over time. You'll just mouse over something or click on it and a little learning thing will open up, kind of like Microsoft. But I don't think that's the whole answer. That's only one small piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Josh, thanks very much for painting this fascinating picture of how corporate learning is and should occur in this changed landscape. I'd like to thank you for sharing your insights.
My pleasure.
And thank the rest of you for joining us, for taking the time to engage in this, what I guess is a micro-learning event. And I hope you'll join us again during the next interview, which will take place on June 8th. So thanks a lot, and bye for now.
You're welcome. Bye.